Shalom. Welcome. This is our midweek Torah study. It's been a couple weeks since many of you, or maybe 3 or 4 weeks since many of you have heard from me. As some of you know, our family contracted COVID, and as such, it took us a couple weeks to get that sorted out and get ourselves back on track, of course, as those things go. For the most part, our experience with COVID was relatively mild, and we are grateful to Adonai for that. For the most part, nobody in our family had any real terrible symptoms. So, but in any case, that would explain the little delay that we've had. So we're going to go ahead and get caught up with our Torah study here over the next week or so, and then we should be back on track, and everything should be okay. So looking forward to that. So let's begin. This week, we would have been looking at Parsha 10, Mikketz at the end, and we're in the middle of the story of Joseph. In Bereshit, this week's Parsha for Mikketz would have been chapters 41 through 44, verse 17. And we're in the middle of the story of Joseph. It has been a couple years since the baker and the cupbearer were in the prison with Joseph, and Pharaoh has had two dreams that caused him to summon his astrologers and his wizards and magicians and ask for a interpretation or translation of the dream. He's not satisfied with any of the interpretations that are offered, and so the cupbearer remembers that Joseph in prison had correctly and accurately interpreted his dream when they were in prison together. And so the cupbearer relays this to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh immediately has Joseph brought out of the pit. And Joseph interprets that in a short time there will be 7 years of unusual blessing, followed by 7 years of extraordinary famine. Joseph suggests to Pharaoh that he appoint a wise and discerning man to harness the years of plenty in preparation for the years of famine. Pharaoh somehow recognizes that the spirit of Adonai is in Joseph, appoints him as a viceroy to oversee the entire project, and Pharaoh gives Joseph an Egyptian name, Sophnat Paneah, and selects Osnat, Joseph's ex-master's daughter, as some people read it, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as Joseph's wife, which is a little bit of irony in that the reason Joseph was in prison was because of the accusation and slander of Potiphar's wife, in that Potiphar, that Joseph had assaulted Potiphar's wife was the accusation. Of course, it was wrong. And so that's how Joseph ended up in prison in the first place. So as a result of Joseph's plan, he is released from prison. He is made number two in charge of all the land, and then Egypt becomes the breadbasket of the Middle East during a time of famine, worldwide famine here. Joseph has 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Jacob, hearing that there is food in Egypt, sends his sons to buy provisions. When they arrive there, they come before Joseph and bow down before him, fulfilling the prophecy of the dream. Joseph recognizes them immediately, but they do not recognize him in his new outfit as second in charge of all of Egypt. Joseph plays the part of an Egyptian overlord and acts harshly towards the brothers, accusing them of being foreign spies, interrogating them, etc. Joseph sells them food eventually, but decides to keep Shimon hostage until they bring their youngest brother Benjamin home, or back to him, as proof of their honesty. Joseph commands his servants to place the money in the top of their sacks, and on the return journey, when they're feeding their donkeys, they discover the money, and their hearts sink, and they realize that there is something very wrong in this scenario. They return to their father Jacob and tell Jacob everything that has happened. At first, Jacob refuses to let Benjamin go down to Egypt, but when the famine continues and grows even worse, he concedes Judah guarantees Benjamin's safety, and the brothers, including Benjamin, but not including Shimon, who's in prison in Egypt during this time. After inquiring about his father's welfare, Joseph welcomes the brothers lavishly as honored guests. However, when he sees Benjamin, he can barely control his emotions and rushes from the room and weeps. Excuse me. Joseph secretly instructs his servants again to replace the money in the sacks, and in addition, he takes his silver cup and puts it in Benjamin's sack. And then a short way out of town, the brothers are caught up with, they are arrested, they are searched, and they find this silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and so they all return to Joseph in order to work this out. Joseph, of course, is playing the part of the indignant and injured second in command in all of Egypt, and that they have taken advantage of his hospitality and so forth. And so what happens is that the stage is set for this confrontation over Benjamin. Joseph demands that Benjamin become his slave as a punishment for having stolen the silver cup, which of course Joseph had framed. Judah remembers his promise to his father and intercedes and offers himself as a sacrifice. At first Joseph refuses, and that pretty much catches us up with this Torah. The Torah summary, of course, provided by Or Samech, which you can find numerous Torah summaries published in various places around the internet and books. Recommend that you have one on hand or one that you enjoy because it helps you set the stage quickly and get speed quickly in the entirety of the Torah portion, and then you can dig in after that. I would like to introduce a framework in a way that we can view the current Parsha. There are two overarching purposes that must be accomplished in the long macro plan of Adonai. There are two issues which must be addressed. First is that the people of Jacob must go down to Egypt. They must go to Egypt. This is what is going to happen. It is part of their national development, if you will. The second purpose which must be accomplished in the long run, in the macro plan of Adonai, is the Bechorah, the Bechor of the sons of Jacob must be determined. So, we'll deal with these two questions. The first question, they must go to Egypt. Why go to Egypt? First, the prophecy of Abraham, which is this very interesting and sort of crazy exchange between Adonai and Abraham. At the covenant of the parts, Adonai had Abraham divide the young cow, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram in half, and then sacrifice 2 turtle doves, or 1 turtle dove and a young bird. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 15. You could look at verse 11 to follow along. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, but Abraham, or Avram in this case, at this point in his life, drove them away. When the sun was about to set, and a deep sleep fell on Avram, behold, terror and great darkness was falling upon him. Verse 13, then he said to Avram, know for certain that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. They will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I am going to judge the nation that they will serve. Afterward, they will go out with many possessions. But you will come to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Verse 17, when the sun set and it became dark, behold, there was a smoking oven and a fiery torch that passed between the pieces. Verse 18, on that day Adonai cut a covenant with Avram, saying, I give this land to your seed from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephaite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, and the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. So this is the promise that Adonai is making, which we see repeated multiple times throughout the Torah, this promise of land and descendants. But here we have something different. Behold, verse 14 or verse 12. Behold, a terror and a great darkness. This is a nightmare. He's actually having a nightmare, and there's a number of nightmares in the scriptures that we look at that are fascinating in their depth and in what they teach us. But this is one of those nightmares that's being had here by Avram, and it's all about them going down to Egypt. And then it says this, afterward, when they come out, they will go out with many possessions. So they will be enslaved, and it's going to be a time of great terror and darkness and oppression and sorrows. They will be enslaved, but Adonai will bring justice to their enslavement, and they will plunder the land when they leave. It says in the fourth generation they will return. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not complete. The Amorites were an evil people who would go on to practice child sacrifice, human sacrifice, as part of their Ashtoreth and their Baal worship. Clearly, Adonai was proposing judgment against the Amorites unless they should have or could have turned and repented, which they did not do. This is the same offer as was extended to Nineveh at the word of Jonah. This is the same as was offered to Israel and Judah, who were admonished and rebuked from their evil practices and from their idolatry. So when Adonai says in the fourth generation they will return for the iniquity of the Amorites, the sin of the Amorites is not complete, he is understanding and speaking of the future because he knows the future. They're not going to repent. They would have been given every opportunity to, the same as Nineveh, but they would not repent. Then it says this, when the sun had set, there was a smoking oven and a fiery torch. Smoking oven or a smoking pot. A pot would be where you'd have coals in it, and you would carry and move your fire from place to place, and you would use it as a place to bake things. Smoking pot and a fiery torch passed between the cut parts. This is a reference to the column of smoke and the fiery pillar that led Israel in the desert for 40 years. In Exodus chapter 13, Adonai went before them, verse 21, in a pillar of cloud by day to lead the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so they could travel both day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never departed from the people. Lastly, terror and great darkness. Abraham, under the name of Avram here, was terrorized by the experience, the glimpse into the future. We should also be mindful of glimpses into the future that would otherwise bring us terror, enough so that we are sober-minded and sober-minded in the present, in the preparation of those days to come, the days of terror and of fear, but that we should be sober-minded in preparing our faith so that we might be faithful during our days in Egypt. Likewise, we recognize this, that Yeshua was sent to Egypt. Yeshua being sent to Egypt again in terror and fear. It is through terror and fear that Yeshua is sent off to Egypt. Hosea 11:1, when Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. That prophecy. Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. Now when they had gone, behold, an angel of Adonai appears to Joseph in a dream, saying, Get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, stay there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child and kill him. Verse 14, so he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and went to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod's death. This was to fulfill what was spoken by Adonai through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. That, of course, is Matthew's interpretation of the fulfillment of that. It is accurate to say that is the fulfillment of it, but in some of these cases we see that the fulfillments may have multiple meanings, if you will. So he, that is Joseph, got up, took the child, and fled during the night. Once again, we've got a night experience, and so on and so forth. Matthew chapter 2, verse 16, continuing on. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became furious. Now, this is because Yeshua had escaped. He sent and he killed all the boys in Bethlehem, and in all its surrounding area from 2 years old and under, according to the time he had determined from the Magi. Then was fulfilled what was spoken through Jeremiah, the prophet instructions. The prophets. This was fulfilled. This was fulfilled what was spoken through Jeremiah's prophecies. Verse 18 from Matthew chapter 2. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and loud wailing. It's Rachel sobbing for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So, what is this sending into Egypt? Why is this so necessary? There are three archetypes or oppositions types, foils, if you will, to Israel. There is Egypt, there is Babylon and Persia, and then there's Greece and Rome. There's almost like three different archetypes. The Hellenists represent compromise, assimilation. We see humanism evident in Greek and Roman cultures, and they had an influence on the Jews. And Babylon, of course, represents idolatry. It's where they ended up after they committed idolatry, and it led to the exile of Adonai. So Babylon and Persia both representing that. Egypt represents the fear of Israel. It represents that they turned to Egypt out of fear. It represents safety and food, prosperity and health. Even in the Roman and immediate post-Roman era, prosperity and health and even wealth was found in various cities and in cultures of Egypt, at least until perhaps Islam took over. As of now, there are reported less than 100 Jews in all of Egypt, which is a fascinating fact. Some estimate the number of Jews in Egypt to be less than a couple dozen, maybe less than 20. So the question is, how did the children of Jacob end up in Egypt in the first place? We know that the land of Israel was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob multiple times. But Abraham had to negotiate. Abraham actually had to negotiate and overpay for a corner of a field with a cave in it in order to bury his wife Sarah. Isaac dug wells but had nothing. Abimelech entreated him to stay, and so Isaac did. But this was by virtue of his host. It still wasn't in any sort of ownership of the land. However, at the time of Jacob, what do we see? What do we see that's different, contrasting with the experience of Abraham and Isaac in the land, vis-a-vis the land? Jacob actually buys land. And then we see that the brothers, his sons, Simeon and Levi, conquer Shechem. Judah has business dealings outside and away from the family, away from apparently Jacob's business dealings. The children of Jacob are beginning to be successful. They're beginning to stake out their way in the land. They're beginning to occupy the land. It is the famine which actually sabotages all this process. So the purpose of Joseph's life, including the dreams, the visions, his and the baker and the cupbearer and all the dreams of Pharaoh, all this is to get the children of Jacob to Egypt. This is to satisfy the overarching purpose, the overarching intention of Adonai. That of somehow getting the children of Jacob to Egypt in order for them to have this experience. Out of Egypt I called my son, in order for them to walk the same road that Yeshua walked. The second, and just as a reminder, we have the terror going down to Egypt in the prophecy, the dream to Abraham, to Avram. And then we have the fear and the terror as Yosef and Miriam and Yeshua fled to Egypt after his birth. Okay, moving on. let's see how we're doing here. The second major purpose of Joseph's life, his life's sort of goal, his life's sort of purpose here, is to get the Bechorah to step up, to identify the Bechor. Joseph has a number of issues in dealing with this. Notices that the brothers have arrived, all 10 of the brothers except Benjamin. And this is different than what is hinted at in Genesis 37. In Genesis 37, when Joseph was 17 years old, he was shepherding the flocks with his brothers, with the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Why was Joseph with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah? And this is one of the commentators describes it this way, because as sons of concubines, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah would have had no inheritance. They just would have worked in the family business, but they would not have had a portion. So perhaps Joseph felt an affinity with them, that they were also likely second class and treated with scorn and disgust, that they were disliked the same way perhaps Joseph was disliked. The tension seems to indicate that there were already some jockeying for position and some role presumptions in the generation of the brothers. We see both Reuben and Judah advancing ideas about what to do with Joseph. We see Reuben and Judah trying to take the dominant role. Reuben says to his father, Genesis 42 verse 37, you can put my 2 sons to death if I don't bring him back to you. Put him in my hand, I will return him to you. Speaking of Benjamin, you see Reuben kind of staging himself. Jacob's response to this is, he says, my son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he alone remains. If harm should come to him along the way, if it happened to him along the way you're going, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in grief. So what we see Reuben staging himself and positioning himself and trying to get himself a position of authority and prominence politically amongst the brothers. Verse 8 of chapter 43, then Judah said to his father Israel, please send the boy with me, and we'll get up and go, so that we'll live and not die, we and you and our children. I myself will be his pledge. You can demand him back from my own hand if I don't bring him back to you and place him before you. Then you can blame me all my days. If we had not delayed, we could have returned here by now. I offer these just as references to the staging and positioning that was going on amongst the brothers. What we see is that Joseph becomes aware of all this as a child, and again as an adult as he's looking out across the crowded room of the brothers. Joseph sees and understands that the real Bechorah, the real Bechor, needs to stand up. Why is this? Why is it so imperative to get the Bechor to stand up? And why doesn't Joseph assume the role of the Bechorah? Because Joseph understands the role of Judah in subsequent generations in the people of Israel. The role of Judah, remember, is the role of David. David being the prophetic forerunner to Yeshua as king of Israel. And the line of Judah being the line from which Yeshua, of course, comes from as well. So Joseph understands this because he is a wise and discerning man, as we read in the beginning, speaking about Pharaoh's understanding of Joseph. Chapter 41, verse 16, Joseph answered Pharaoh, said, it's not within me. God will answer with shalom for Pharaoh. In other words, Joseph is saying, I don't have the answer to these dreams. But Adonai does. Verse 25, Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream is one. Adonai has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 26, the 7 good cows, they are 7 years, also 7 years of corn, they are 7 years. It is one dream. so on and so on and so forth. Now, as for repeating Pharaoh's dream twice, it's because the matter has been settled by God, and God will quickly make it happen. So now, let Pharaoh select a man discerning and wise, and set him in authority over the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can a man like this be found, one in whom is God's Spirit?" And then this, verse 39, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you." And this, I think, is the point of the life of Joseph, the life and times of Joseph, if you will. See, Joseph is a figure of great influence and great responsibility, and yet understanding his place in the overall schema of history, of the plan of Adonai, that Joseph is there almost priest-like, as a blessing to the brothers and a blessing to the Gentile world. In the same way that Melchizedek was a blessing to Abraham and a blessing to Adonai. What we're going to see here is we're going to see that Joseph has made sure that the people are going to be blessed. He has provided for them the way a father or a grandfather would. And yet he's doing all this without his authority in the place of the Bechorah, the Bechor. I think that's a big part of what's happening here, is that Joseph is mindful, and this is an interpretation that a lot of different teachers share, that Joseph is mindful of the stakes moving forward in this family. That when Adonai established the prophecies for Abraham and his descendants, at that point there were many things that must take place. But one of the things that must take place was Judah to step up and become the Bechor. And the other thing that must take place is they must go down to Egypt. The people must go to Egypt, but they need a reassurance that they're going to come out with blessing. And of course we see that they do indeed do that. They come out plundering the Egyptians and so forth. So it does get accomplished. And then later, of course, Joseph is going to set up the brothers there in Egypt, and they're going to multiply incredibly. So Joseph is the wise and discerning young man. So what was it he was doing with his brothers and his father? Why didn't he just reveal himself? You might ask the question, why didn't Joseph send home a message? And I've done a lot of work on this. Why didn't Joseph send home a postcard? Why didn't Joseph send a messenger to let his father and his father's family know that he was okay? I'm not dead. Everything's okay. I'm in Egypt. I'm number 2 in charge. And if you need anything, come and get me. That would be the right thing that you would understand. So why didn't that happen? And in fact, if his father is mourning, then every year that passes leads in a greater way towards that. So why didn't Joseph send a message? What is he withholding here? And if you look at it in terms of the Bechorah, you look at it in terms of the overarching plan of Adonai for all of humanity, then we begin to understand that Joseph just knew his place in that, and his place wasn't as a Bechor. He was going to stand there as a judge, effectively, would be the biblical term for it, standing in the intersection and working all the details out for everybody. So what is Joseph looking for when he brings in the brothers and he frames Benjamin and so on and so on and so forth? One of the things he's looking for, I believe, he's looking for repentance. He's looking to see if the brothers have truly repented in honesty and integrity. He's looking to see how his father felt about him, what his father thought of him. We ask the question, why did Joseph never send a postcard? And yet there's a question that hangs in the atmosphere like a pallor over the story, and it is this: why didn't Jacob guess at least that perhaps there was some lack of truthfulness in the brother's story? He's very trusting in that sense. So Joseph is naturally questioning how his father feels about him and what his father thinks of him. We ask the question, why did Joseph never send a postcard? We might say maybe his father needed to send a postcard as well. We ask these questions about Joseph perhaps in part because we wonder, we question if Joseph did not know where his father was. Remember, the last memory that Joseph has of his father is that of his father sending him to find his brothers. In fact, actually, just before that is the dream. And then after the dream, we have the dispatch from Jacob to go find the brothers. So it's almost a question. Joseph could have asked the question, and I'm sure he did. Perhaps I was reprimanded. Perhaps I was being punished for my dream. So that is what we're looking at there. It's almost as if Joseph has a sense, a connection to Adonai, and a connection to what Adonai is doing in this sort of telescopic macro season of the Torah. And as such, it is what we see here. He's being reprimanded by his father in a sense, and then he goes off to find his brothers, who then sold him into slavery. Perhaps that is the ultimate goal of his father, if you want to interpret it that way, and we question whether or not Joseph might have. All right. So moving on, though, and this is what I maintain is the only other answer to that, is that perhaps Joseph had an understanding of Adonai's plan throughout history, which would give Joseph some peace, and that is why he never sent a message to his father, because it had to be done on certain terms, and that is specifically that the Bechor had to reveal himself. And that's where Joseph was going with this sort of complex staging and framing with the cup, etc. All in an attempt to get Judah to step up, or the Bechorah to step up and assume his rightful place in the family. All right, that concludes it for this week. We will continue to try to get caught up, so stay tuned. Of course, if you're a subscriber, we appreciate that, and that allows you to get notifications when I do publish these messages and teachings. If you're in Fort Myers, feel free to join us. We have services on Saturday. If you would like any more questions, you'll see my email address down in the descriptions below. And I just am very grateful to do this with all of you, and just ask that Adonai would continue to bless you as we go from here. Shalom, shalom.